Welcome back to the Assertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we're going to look at rigid versus loose boundaries. We're going to do that with a post titled, Am I the Asshole for Not Helping Watch My Nephew During a Flight Delay? My older sister, who's 25, and I, who's 23, grew up in New York City. Our parents own a vacation home in California, and when I moved out, they decided to move there permanently. They've only been back to New York to visit once, so recently I decided to go visit them. My mom and sister were talking, and my plans came up in conversation. She called and asked why I didn't tell her I was planning to go to Cali. I said it had nothing to do with her, so why would I have to tell her anything? My sister said it made no sense for us to do separate trips when we could just go together. I said, you're acting extremely entitled to something that you had no part in, and I'm not obligated to include you in every plan I make. My sister said she just wants our parents to meet her son. I replied, he's 5 months old. You've had plenty of time to take him if it was really that important to you. My sister then cries to my mom. My mom said it was a good idea. Said if my sister cared so much, she would have planned to see them on her own. My mom said my sister really needed this. I told my sister if she comes, she can't ask me for shit. I'm not helping with her kid and act like I'm not even there. My sister did agree to this. The day came and our connecting flight was delayed, so we had to stay the night at the airport. I was trying to fall asleep, and my sister asked me if I was really going to sleep. I was annoyed and said, if you leave me the fuck alone. Later, she asked me to watch the baby. I said, just hold him and go to sleep. My sister was scared someone would snatch him while she slept. I told her she sounds fucking crazy and no one wants her kid. She said she was exhausted and had been drinking energy drinks all night, but she was crashing and tried to put him in my arms again. I said, this is exactly why you should have just stayed the fuck at home. I told you from the jump, I'm not doing shit. You already forced your way here. Now you're just going to have to figure it out. She says, seriously, I'm fucking exhausted. I can barely keep my eyes open. I said, then go to sleep. And I closed my eyes. She knew what the terms were. We made it there, but later my mom asked if she really raised me to be so cold towards my sister. She told me my sister had broken down and had a mental meltdown. I said I love my sister, but she should grow up and stop being so dramatic about a situation she put herself in. My mom said it wouldn't have hurt to help her even just a little. I told my mom I didn't help my sister make the baby, and she should have known something could go wrong when traveling. We got back to New York a week ago and haven't spoken to each other since, but she just texted me today how hurt she was, and she feels like I don't care about her or my nephew. I told her she knew what she was getting into when she begged to come and imposed on my trip. She said she thought I would have changed my mind when I realized we would have had to sleep. I would have changed my mind when I realized we would have to sleep in the airport and that she would have done it for me. I said, your kid, your responsibility. I might be willing to just apologize to shut her up if people say I'm the asshole. It's a lot of attitude in this.
That's a lot. I was like, my first thought was like, man, the subtle art of not giving a fuck. Like the author has got that down. Like no fucks given at all. Wow.
Absolutely. All right. So we chose this one to go over the difference between rigid versus loose boundaries. How do you explain rigid versus loose boundaries?
I tend to lean towards, terms that no one knows what I'm talking about. So I'm like, let's talk about the cell membrane in biology is kind of how I talk about it, right? So, we're all made up of cells, and for the body to be healthy and the cells to live, there has to be information, nutrients coming in, and there has to be waste that's going out. So there has to be permeation in that cell wall, right? It'd be kind of like a wall that has like gates in it. basically. So if there's a rigid boundary, that cell's basically on an island by itself and it has no means to get the nutrients and whatever, waste, it's just stuck there. There's no exchange of information. Loose boundaries are going to have things come in and out that don't need to be coming in and out. So like it's almost like the gates of the wall are too big, or the protein pumps in the cell wall are pumping things that they shouldn't. Where healthy boundaries is kind of there's this permeation to it where things can go in and out, but the cell is able to regulate itself. It's getting the nutrients it needs, and there's a flow of information there. So that's in all my nerdery. That's how I describe it. Or maybe a castle wall is another way I described it, with having a drawbridge kind of metaphor as well. How do you talk about it?
I talk about it with the castle and the drawbridge. And I think that's from Candy. Shout out Candy.
Shout out Candy, the best supervisor. Maybe that's where I learned that from. I don't know where I picked that one up. That makes sense.
But the drawbridge, whereas loose boundaries, your drawbridge is always down. Anybody can just walk into the castle and take over. Rigid boundaries, the drawbridge is always up, so it's hard to get food, supplies, weaponry in and out. There's like no trade going on. And as I was saying that, I was thinking of Frozen, where before the coronation, like nobody came into the castle. Everything was shut down. Nobody's trading with Arendelle.
So the boundaries were too rigid.
Their boundaries were too rigid. But then coronation happens and they're letting people in and out, but it's not our willy-nilly. There's still a little bit of structure there. And so going back to the castle metaphor, I always say that's just kind of having a guard at the gate who's like looking down to see who's there. And if it's somebody okay, it's like, yeah, let down the gate. They can come in. Or be like, we don't know, you go away. We're not putting down the bridge.
Yeah. I have heard to be like, halt, who goes there? Like medieval kind of. So I'm gonna guess we're gonna say that the youngest sister's boundaries here would be rigid. The drawbridge was up, the cell was closed. There was no compromise or softening of that initial boundary there. Would you say that they're rigid too?
I'm a little on the fence.
Okay.
And we've discussed this in a previous episode. I couldn't tell you guys which one at this point, where you talk about the difference between rigid and healthy boundaries is the ability to be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
It would be rigid in the sense that the circumstances changed and she wasn't willing to be flexible to that. I'm on the fence a little bit because she was clear up front. And so she set the boundary. So I could also see this as just her enforcing the boundary. She had this idea of what she wanted her travel experience to look like. She didn't want to have to deal with a little kid during travel. She set up a boundary to protect that travel experience, and she held that boundary.
I feel like if this is a healthy boundary, it was established with very aggressive communication style. So guess there is a space where maybe the boundary in itself is held up and even enforced effectively, but the means in which you discuss the boundary is perhaps rigid or aggressive.
For most people, they would consider this a very mean boundary. You don't want to help your sister. You don't want to aid in caretaking your own nephew. And I think a lot of people maybe have difficulty wrapping their head around that piece of the dynamic.
Which is like a value judgment of like, oh, that shouldn't be a boundary because any quote unquote good person would have helped their sister and watched their nephew. So it's more of an issue that the boundary was there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense there.
And I could see that even with mom saying, did I raise you to be this cold towards your sister?
I do think she was in lesson teaching mode a little bit, of regardless of what happens, like you did this to yourself, deal with your shit. So I think it was like, if you don't want to be distressed, stop being so crazy. So I think it was a little bit of trying to teach a lesson, but again, maybe a healthy boundary done in an aggressive way, a little bit. Yeah. And we're talking, you kind of resonated with the little sister because the older sister sounds like she has some history maybe of being a little neurotic is kind of what I picked up. And the younger sister was just not down for that, So this one hit a little close to home, huh?
It did. In high school, the sister that's closest in age to me had a baby while I was a sophomore. And so I did help quite a lot in the caretaking.
Okay. Yeah. So really close to home, huh?
Yeah. And as I was reading through some of the comments, I learned the older sister is married, but the husband works, like travels for work. I might be making this piece up, but I'm like vaguely remembering like oil rig, like out in the ocean type shit. Like
Oh,
where
she's
he's gone,
home a lot. Okay, so she's home
where
a lot.
he's gone for like periods. So I am curious if maybe there's some additional babysitting duties little sister's helping with during this period, or if older sister's reaching out for maybe more emotional support while the spouse is away traveling.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is really not only a vacation to go see parents, but it's a vacation to get away from her sister. And now her sister's
following her.
And she used the word imposed at the end, like, you imposed on my trip.
Yeah.
So she really didn't want her sister there at all.
Yeah. Especially, and traveling with a 5-month-old is so stressful, especially when you're at an airport, and so I definitely think the older sister was a little opportunistic and probably wanted to go travel, didn't feel confident to do that herself. And I think the author was picking up of like, you're only doing this because you got some extra muscle.
Yeah.
You're not doing this by yourself. So you're already kind of hinting that you're going to expect me to help you with this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was correct in that.
She
knew what was going on from the jump.
Yeah. And I can see too, and again, this is maybe because I, indicated that my natural default style is aggressive, but if I'm, if one of my siblings was saying, oh my God, somebody's going to snatch my baby, I'd be like, you're acting crazy as fuck. Like, I'm not playing into that. Like, we're just going to teach you a lesson here. Like, that's not going to work. You need to stop being so crazy. I'll let you work on that yourself, Yeah.
Yes.
Is baby snatching a common thing in an airport? I don't know whether
I don't know what the statistics are.
Yeah. If you want to pay $1,000 for a ticket and you're going to snatch a baby, maybe you view that as worth it, but that seems a little irrational to me. And like I think you said too, when you're reading the comments, it sounds like both of these people had means to get a hotel and had enough money to where other options could have been explored, but the older sister chose not to because the younger sister decided to sleep at the airport.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, it's that buddy system. Sounds like she has some difficulty being alone.
Yeah, kind of needy a little bit, a little dependent maybe. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense where maybe the younger sister felt the need to be a little aggressive because it felt smothering. Maybe you're needy.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. If somebody has a hard time with healthy boundaries, as most of us do you think it's better to lean on the rigid side or on the looser side of a boundary?
Personally, I think I would prefer if my clients were leaning rigid.
Okay.
Because they're already accomplishing the act of setting the boundary. They're already accomplishing the act of enforcing the boundary. We just have to learn the flexibility and compromise piece. Where somebody with loose boundaries, they have to do it all. They have to learn how to set the boundary because they're not doing that. They have to learn how to hold the boundary and enforce the boundary because they're not doing that either.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we're most of the way there with the rigid boundary. We've just overcorrected a little bit. But with loose boundaries, we haven't even started making progress, I feel like. It's kind of like we're just throwing out threats. If you do this, then this is going to happen. But nothing ever happens. So it's not really a boundary. We say it's a loose boundary, but it's not really a loose boundary. It's more like a threat or just
request.
Maybe this will happen. Maybe it won't.
Okay. So you're saying it's easier maybe to correct a rigid boundary as opposed to correct a loose boundary?
Yes.
Okay.
So in my opinion, I guess I would prefer rigid boundaries because we've done the hardest parts.
Yeah, I guess, and I was kind of thinking I feel like rigid boundary, you're at greater risk for hurting the other person. Loose boundaries, you're at greater risk for being hurt. And I think maybe it also comes down to which are you better able to tolerate? Would you rather have guilt or remorse about maybe that you created a wall, or would it be, oh man, I've subjected myself to some kind of harm because I wasn't, being firm in a boundary? And I guess it would depend, safety, talking about safety issues, definitely rigid. That's better to have a wall, right? Than, you can't come back from being murdered, whatever, Well,
that's a good point you bring up as far as who's getting hurt. And if we're saying this is a rigid boundary and older sister got hurt, yes, that was maybe a really stressful and emotionally exhausting experience for her. And she had informed consent to that experience. Sister communicated this up front, and you agreed. I agreed to act like I don't know you. I agreed not to ask you for shit.
So if that person's
hurt,
it's not her
she
job
did get hurt, but she knew that was the possibility when she joined the trip. I feel like that was a calculated risk she took and it didn't pay
Mhm.
out.
Mm-hmm.
So I think rigid boundaries, I'm still okay with if it hurts the other person, as long as you've done your part in communicating and making sure they understand what exactly is going to happen.
Okay. Okay.
And they're having informed consent to whatever hurt that may occur.
So even if the boundary is rigid, if you've agreed to the boundary on the front end, it's kind of it's that other person's responsibility to deal with their own hurts.
Yeah,
kind of
they've
situation.
signed up for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess the nephew wasn't really hurt, right? He didn't get snatched, and maybe mom's
He
disappointed.
slept for sure.
Like
He
he's
slept,
not like
he
a
ate, he was
baby.
fine.
Oh God, they have it so good. They push around like in a stroller, and I'm like, man, the good days.
No
I still
bills,
push around.
except
Yeah,
like you're like peeing and shitting on yourself.
I mean, a small price to pay. If you said oh man, yeah, there's downsides, right? There's downsides to it. Yeah. Do you, so I said, maybe the mom was hurt, disappointed. What do you feel like was the mom's role in this? Maybe kind of encouraging it on the front end, huh?
Yeah, I think she maybe pulled at some emotional heartstrings there with the little sister. I was like, oh, it'd be so great to see you both. And I haven't met my grandson, and I'd really like to see him. There may have been a little bit of emotional manipulation there. And I think little sister may have gone along with it because nobody really wants to disappoint their parents.
Yeah.
And there may have been this dynamic of, I'm going to do a little bit of assuming here. She may have been feeling a little bit of rejection. Here she is wanting to spend some one-on-one time with her parents, and her parents are saying, we don't need that. Why don't you bring your sister and your nephew? That'd be way more fun than just you coming. So she may already be feeling rejected, and that attachment is not as secure. So she wants to do something to kind of reconnect and build that attachment. So she's going to do some people pleasing and agree.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But then she's still resentful, which is why she's setting this really harsh boundary with her sister of like, don't ask me for shit. Because she's not doing it for the sister. She's doing it to resecure the attachment with mom that mom damaged, and mom should have been doing the work too.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear that. I guess I kind of like, again, don't take it personal, right? I know you like the little sister. I kind of like the little sister was being a bit like, I didn't agree to this, so everybody has to suffer because I don't like this. A little bit of kind of like shoving,
pettiness, yes.
Yeah, like shoving the rigidity. We talked about distress tolerance a little bit. It's like there's no picking your battles of like, okay, your nephew isn't violating the boundary because he's 5 months old. Like, can you not hold your nephew? And kind of like a little bit of like forest for the trees, maybe I might think. Or if you're going to agree to have somebody on a trip, is acting like I'm not even there. That's probably not, I don't think that's realistic. I think that's kind of an odd boundary to set in the first place of let's pretend like we're not going to be on the same plane and we haven't been siblings for forever. Just pretend like that's not real. I think that's not really a boundary. That's like a fantasy land of it also. Either say I'm not comfortable or say, hey, it's a free country. You get on this flight, I can tolerate this for a little bit, or like, this is something that's not acceptable to me. I don't think that's something that's going to work for me. But then to kind of compromise, but then be a dick about it both ways, I think is also a little rough. But I do appreciate her steadfastness. I think that's rare, Yeah. A little bit going on. So mom is maybe also a little want this perfect world in which my siblings come here together too. Like talk about her. She might not really have really realistic expectations between their dynamic either.
Yeah. But sister from the jump little sister didn't want her older sister to go. She initially said no. When the sister called her, it wasn't until mom called. So I think she may have been better off sticking with that initial no, because yes, she would have maybe seen as an ass for not allowing her sister to go, but less of an ass than telling your sister to go and then not helping her. And then her having this quote unquote mental meltdown, whatever that means.
Yeah, like you're like upset, right? Okay, it's not a meltdown. You just had a hard night.
You just had a hard night and you're exhausted.
Yeah, and I think it's right. So she let other people kind of push her boundaries, and then probably got resentful and kind of took it out on everybody else. That her initial.
So then the next boundary was extra rigid because the first one
exactly
wasn't necessarily respected. She said no, and sister then triangulated, brought mom in to the dynamic, right?
Yeah, that's right. And this is again, and the sister, even by going around kind of jumping rank a little bit and going to mom, that is saying like, I don't respect boundaries,
Yes.
so that's and so when the sister folded, it probably did feel like a defeat, and she probably did feel resentful, like, I'm not doing this because I want to, I'm doing this because you want me to, but I'm going to punish you the whole time too,
Mhm.
you
Yep.
know yeah. Interesting. So so it sounds like a couple of things could have gone differently. Younger sister, who's the author, could have initially just stuck to the boundary, said, hey, I know it's disappointing, but she's kind of neurotic. I know she's going to overextend, and that's not the kind of trip I want to have. She can have her own
Yep.
trip. Or you guys can go out to New York and visit her, or she could have said, do you think, it sounds like you're saying once at the airport, you're okay with how the younger sister responded by being really firm in that? She did okay.
I'm okay only because she communicated it first. Had she not communicated that
Yeah.
and was just like, yeah, fine, you can come, and then didn't help,
Yep.
I would probably feel different. But she communicated exactly what her intentions were,
She did.
and she stuck to that.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I'm okay with it. I don't think that necessarily made her the asshole.
Okay. What about mom? Maybe I would say this is between you and your sister or something. Maybe recognize that you're getting looped in
Mm-hmm.
and to not participate in the back and forth between them.
Yeah. Or you are the mom. You could help with some of the emotional work. Why are you so resistant to your sister joining? Right. As a little sister, I know you're the oldest. I'm the youngest.
Yeah.
So we have a bit of a different dynamic there.
Yep.
But you really don't have anything of your own. When you join the family, your siblings have already been there. So your parents aren't just your parents. They're also their parents.
Yeah.
Right. Then I have same gender older sibling right above me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, hand me down clothes, hand me down toys.
Yeah.
All the teachers had her first. So there's really not a lot you get for yourself apart from like your friends.
True. So you're like, damn, she just wanted a trip by herself to go hang out with her parents one.
Yeah. So in my eyes, now she's finally 23. She's finishing school. She's getting her finances on point, and she's trying to adult and just do things for herself and by herself. Sounds like she's fairly successful at that. And now she kind of wants to go home and just be with her parents by herself.
Yeah, I totally can understand that need. Yeah, and that dynamic you're saying has probably been in a long time, to where the younger sisters had to be kind of overshadowed in some way, or seen in relation to her older sister as opposed to her own individual person.
Or even like the comparison game. Well, your sister never did that.
I do think, I'm inclined to think she's a little bit of an asshole. I think that she maybe had a healthy boundary, but I think she did it in a pretty aggressive way. So again, I think it's not even what you're saying necessarily that makes you aggressive. It's how you say it. I think that she had a lot of aggressive communication here, as opposed to saying like, hey, a way of enforcing boundary. I let you know what to expect. I didn't want to be here to kind of call to you on this trip. I'm going to go to sleep, and whatever's going to happen, I trust you're going to figure it out. You can make it through the night. I think there's general ways to enforce a boundary without being not my fucking problem. That I think is quite aggressive. But
I will give you that piece. Her communication style was very assholey.
Okay. So the boundary side, okay.
She's not an asshole for setting the boundary in my book.
Yes, I agree.
I think the way you communicated it was really rude.
So we'll give her like a 50% asshole.
Yeah, 50% asshole rating.
Yes. And also I think her sister is an asshole.
Yeah, maybe, for sure.
Maybe.
I think so. I think if not an asshole, she's maybe inconsiderate.
I think she relies on other people to manage her emotions. And when that didn't happen, she was trying to kind of spiraling as a way to push boundaries, I think. And that wasn't working, and she was getting upset.
Absolutely. I think my last note on this is her very last line. I might be willing to apologize just to shut her up if people say I'm the asshole. Like, don't apologize just to shut people up. I think that's insulting to the person. That's insulting to the idea of apologies. Apologize only if you actually think you did something wrong. You can do a validating statement, like, I understand why you were hurt by this, but I don't regret my decision.
It's kind of looping it back to what she did originally, of this is something that I really wanted. I said no, but then other people reacted badly, so I softened, and now I'm pissed off at everybody.
Yeah.
And I think, well, even too, I think don't apologize if you're not going to unless you're not going to do it again. So if you plan on having that boundary again in the future, then don't apologize, because that's the point of apology. Yeah,
and the sister will have that same expectation that you'll gain flexibility halfway through. Well, like, she apologized, so she learned a lesson.
Yeah.
But if the sister's in a mood, little sister's not going to have that flexibility.
Right. And again, if she was, I think, again, she could apologize. Maybe, hey, I came off really abrasive. There was probably, kinder ways to go about doing that. I didn't know what else to say, and I was frustrated,
Mhm.
So I think she could have maybe, again, apologized for the communication style, but does not need to apologize for the boundary setting or what
Yeah.
her limits were. Yeah. What are the summary points here?
In summary, with loose boundaries, you tend to hurt yourself because boundaries are there to protect you. And with rigid boundaries, you risk hurting others. So assertive boundaries create that balance between protecting yourself while ensuring you're not inflicting harm on others. And we've said it before, it'll probably come up often, but communicate your boundaries and the expectations around them so people can make an informed decision as to whether they want to respect your boundaries or not. Would you add anything to that?
I just think if you feel resentful, it's probably a sign that your boundary is getting pushed. So
Ooh, yeah.
So if you soften on a boundary and you're mad about it, that's a you thing. You need to go back and revisit that conversation too.
Perfect. All right, guys, that's what we have for you today. As always, we want to hear your thoughts. Send them to us at assertivepodcast@gmail.com. And until next time.